And as promised, here comes number 25 to the greatest horror movie of all time. I hope that you enjoy, I hope that you agree, and if you don't, that's great too. Let me know in the comments below. Let's jump into it. Welcome to Den of Horror! Number 25 is one that you might argue doesn't even belong on a horror movie list, but I ask you, what could be more horrific than witnessing a Vietnam vet descending into the clutches of loneliness, violence, and paranoia? You want psychological horror at its disturbing best? I give you Taxi Driver. By the late 60s, horror had shifted its focus to themes concerning religion, the occult, and of course Satanism. And one film that drove these themes home in an immersive and palpable way was Roman Polanski's critically acclaimed and by now legendary Rosemary's Baby. Another brilliant piece of cinema, also about a heroine caught in the terrifying grips of paranoia, is The Babadook. This Australian-made film has become a cult classic. Now, it would be easy to ignore this small, crowd-funded, independent film, but in the Den, it is one of the greatest horror movies ever made. The works of Stephen King have long been harvesting pastures for horror filmmakers. One story that captured the imagination of a generation was about an ancient evil that terrorized in the form of a dancing clown. After a respectable mini-series, the horror of Pennywise was well and truly and vividly captured in Andy Muschietti's fine adaptation of It. Another film that you would probably want to see higher up on this list is one that set the groundwork and the pace for the 80s slasher genre. Halloween is without a doubt one of the most successful, one of the most influential, and one of the most impactful horror movies ever made. Breaking us into the top 20 is a relatively recent film that in a very short space of time is already being cited as being one of the greatest horror movies ever made. Get Out is a film for, of, and about its time. It deals with themes such as racism, slavery, and discrimination among the social class. Poignant, impactful, thought-provoking, and not to mention pretty damn scary. As great as Paranormal Activity and Cloverfield were, we have the Blair Witch Project to thank for reviving the found footage horror genre. Yet its true innovative brilliance also lies in how it weaponizes your imagination to work against you by suggesting its omnipresent and sinister antagonist rather than actually showing it. Dracula, Lestat, Blade, Nosferatu, hell, even Jerry the Vampire. But if you are looking for the greatest vampire film, maybe you need to look outside of Hollywood and go to Sweden. Let the Right One In is the story of an awkward 12-year-old boy who befriends a strange girl with an even stranger thirst. What sets this film apart from other vampire films is its interesting contrasts. Creepy yet unassuming. Touching yet scary. You might call it a thriller, I call it the greatest psychological horror to rival Taxi Driver. Joker gave us Gotham without Batman, a superhero movie without a superhero, and a clown without a laugh. It also gave us a film that challenged the superhero genre in a profound kind of way. I mean, can you easily go back to watching brightly colored capes and hammers? Maybe, but maybe not. Scream gave us something completely different. A horror movie about horror movies. It deconstructed the genre, and it also catapulted Wes Craven back to the very top of the horror pile. And it also got all of us to fall in love with Neve Campbell all over again. Some of us may argue whether or not M. Night Shyamalan ever truly matched a storytelling genius mojo after 1999's The Sixth Sense, but what cannot be disputed is how well he wrote that script, how well he directed that film, and the film's huge impact. Not to mention giving us a film that had one of cinema's biggest ever twists. I'm a massive fan of James Cameron's sequel, but it's Ridley Scott's 1979 seminal classic Alien that truly takes the cake. And it's not a sci-fi. With its dark atmosphere, its dread, and its chest-busting monsters, it's firmly one of the greatest horror movies ever made, and it's just as terrifying today as it was some 40 years ago. At 13, we have the film that Quentin Tarantino himself said, the only film that actually scared him. The Thing is Carpenter classic, regardless of what the critics said back in 1982. Tarantino loved it, Scorsese loved it, Tim Burton loved it too, and it is known as one of horror's most important films. If you want to know where violence, tension, and gore all started, just watch Black Sunday. Halloween, The Thing, They Live, Christine. Is John Carpenter the greatest horror filmmaker of all time? Well, if you're still not convinced, let's add one more film to that list. The Fog, a cult classic that is scary and claustrophobic, but always classy, and that it shows you just enough to keep you looking over your shoulder. Maybe you loved it, maybe you hated it, maybe you haven't even seen it. I certainly loved Midsommar so much that I believe it to be the 10th greatest horror movie of all time. Nowhere near as praised or as lauded as it should have been, it is still the most tautly paced and drenched in a sense of dread film that I have ever seen. And if you are thinking of joining a fun and peaceful loving pagan community somewhere in Europe, maybe you should watch this film first. We are finally bringing out the big guns. When Tobe Hooper made the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he wasn't just making a horror movie, but he created an immersive and tangible chainsaw-wielding nightmare. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre served as a watershed moment. There was the world before, and now there is the world after. If Halloween and Friday the 13th gave us masked madmen that ran around after teenagers in the physical realm, Wes Craven gave us a monster that you weren't even safe from in your own dreams. A Nightmare on Elm Street comes in at number 8, and deservedly so. 1984 might be a long time ago, but such was the impact of this film that Freddy Krueger only ever feels a single nightmare away. At number 7, we have the Stephen King adaptation that Stephen King didn't like. Yet, The Shining has become stuff of legend. It has horror, it has tension, and probably one of the most famous lines in movie history. I watched the film recently, and to be totally honest with you, I can see why it received so much critical acclaim. It has everything, even though Stephen King didn't like it for not being true to the source material.
Here's Johnny!
It happens, but not often. A sequel that manages to improve on a near-flawless original, The Bride of Frankenstein. For a film that is nearly 90 years old, it still packs an emotional punch, but more importantly, it exemplifies at the highest level the attributes that make horror horror. I told you you would hear from Frankenstein again. Older is not always better. 2018's Hereditary, about a family haunted by a mysterious presence, is not good. It's exceptional. Watching this film is a challenge for the respiratory system, because taking a single breath during the running of this film is near impossible. Number 5, above The Shining, Hereditary? Hell yeah. If not for this next film, horror would probably still be about men in black capes with long fangs and covered in yak hair. In 1960, Alfred Hitchcock gave us a different kind of monster. A monster that looked alarmingly a lot like you, or me, or even your mom. Psycho did not just change horror, it changed the world. Number 3 is arguably the greatest psychological horror movie ever made. The Silence of the Lambs simply has to be in the top 10. In a world that is unfortunately rife with sexism, horror has never shied away from strong heroines. And Clarice Starling is probably the most complex and strongest of them all. We are now reaching the summit, number 2. Some of you might argue that this film should actually be in the number 1 spot. I would quietly accept that point. But it is not at number 2 because it's simply on every horror movie list. It is on every horror movie list because it deserves to be. Impactful, influential, terrifying. It changed the face of horror. William Friedkin's The Exorcist. Even the title, The Exorcist, still to this day bears a terrifying kind of power. I am looking forward to the remake, but to the makers, big shoes, my friends, big shoes. Some of you will roll your eyes, but some of you will know exactly why Jaws is in the number 1 spot. Is it the greatest horror movie of all time? Well, I think that it deserves to be in the argument. Jaws tapped into our deepest fears in a very profound kind of way. Boasting one of film's most famous scores, it set the prototype for the Hollywood blockbuster. But more importantly, like with Hitchcock, Jaws suggests its horror rather than always directly showing it. Whether you've seen Jaws or not, every single time you set foot into the ocean, that slight tingle of fear that you feel is because of Jaws. So there you have it, the 50 greatest horror movies of all time. Let me tell you, it was exceptionally difficult to write this list, because inevitably what happens is you sit down and you realize how many great horror movies there are. So there are a lot of movies that probably should have been on this list. You tell me, which movies did I miss? Which movies should have been on this list and was absolutely sacrilege that I didn't put them on? I'm very, very interested to hear. Where do you guys agree with me? Let me know. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Always interested to hear. Don't forget to subscribe, but more importantly, be safe, be happy, be horror.